In this final, fourth part of the plant nutrition series, we'll take a look at the role of sunlight in how plants grow. Now, we've previously learned that plants are not using large quantities of soil to build new tissue. Rather, they're using water molecules and carbon dioxide from the air. And the carbon dioxide enters small holes called stomata. If you block those holes, the plant cannot get its source of carbon and it will die. The goal here is to make glucose. That's a sugar molecule, and that is the main product of this process that we're calling photosynthesis. And as Priestley and Lavoisier argued, the plants are liberating oxygen back into the atmosphere. And this oxygen is critically necessary for animals to do respiration, to breathe, and as well as flames. So combustion is a chemical reaction involving oxygen. Now in this lesson, then, we'll take a look at the role of sunlight. Now sunlight is considered to be an energy source for the chemistry that the plant is doing, as opposed to a material, a substance. So carbon dioxide and water molecules would be material things. These are substances that are used to build another molecule. Sunlight would be an energy, right? And so we'll take a look at some of the some experiments to reveal the importance of sunlight in plant growth. In the 1700s, a guy by the name of Ingenhousz set up the following apparatus. Now, this is a beaker full of water, and he's got this kind of bell with a tube on it here, and he's going to fill it with water and then invert it. So in the beginning, the whole tube is filled with water, and in the bell part of it, he's going to put the non-green parts of plants in it. And the reason for having this thing filled with water to begin with is so that any gases that are produced by the non-green parts will bubble up and simply collect up here in this part of the tube, and then he can retrieve that gas and identify what kind of gas it is. And when you have the non-green parts of a plant in the bell here, they produce little bubbles that collect over time, and you sample that gas, it's carbon dioxide. And it doesn't matter whether you shine light or no light on the non-green parts, they're always producing carbon dioxide. Now we'll be learning that these non-green parts are producing carbon dioxide because they're burning sugar. The plant is producing sugar by photosynthesis, but then the plant cells are burning the sugar for energy, and animal cells do the same thing. So all these cells, plant cells and animal cells, they are burning sugar and producing carbon dioxide waste. We animals exhale the carbon dioxide, and the plant cells here are also producing carbon dioxide as a waste product from this combustion of sugar inside their cells. Now, interestingly, Ingenhousz discovered something different for the green parts of plants. So we have the leaves and other green parts in this apparatus. And what he found here was it was a larger volume of gas was produced, and when he looked at the identity of the gas, there was a lot of oxygen and some carbon dioxide as well. But this large quantity of oxygen was produced only when light was shining on the green parts. If you turn the light out, the green parts produce the carbon dioxide just as the non-green parts produce carbon dioxide. You turn the light on, and the green parts produce a whole lot of oxygen. It was as if this oxygen liberation was a waste product of the chemistry going on in the green parts. What's that chemistry? We call it today photosynthesis. It's the plant building sugar molecules from water and carbon dioxide molecules, and that chemistry releases oxygen as a waste product. So Ingenhousz was discovering that the critical chemistry going on in plants is happening in the green parts of the plants, and it requires light, and that oxygen is a byproduct of that chemistry. So here are the takeaways. Sunlight energy needed for chemistry photosynthesis. The chemistry only happens in the green parts, and oxygen production is a byproduct of that chemistry. So back to our summary diagram, then the plant, if it needs sunlight to build sugar, then if we deprive the plant of sunlight, it should no longer be able to build glucose. And we can see that by doing a simple experiment. We have a plant here. We're going to cover one leaf with soil and another leaf not. Now, obviously, the leaf that's not covered sunlight will be able to power whatever chemistry is going on in that leaf, and this leaf should be able to build sugar. The leaf that is covered with foil should be deprived of sunlight energy, so it cannot do the chemistry of photosynthesis. It will not be able to build sugar. Well, how are we going to detect whether sugar was built? We can use a chemical stain. iodine reacts with starch. Now, starch is how leaves and plants store sugar. Starch is a chain molecule made up of glucose. So we can stain for starch, and the more starch, then the more sugar was produced. The less starch, the less sugar was produced. And sure enough, you can see that the leaf that was exposed to sunlight, we have a darker stain, and that indicates more glucose was made here. There's more starch here. And the one that was covered in foil, less glucose produced. So when you deprive a leaf of sunlight, the chemistry cannot go on. The leaf cells cannot produce the sugar from water and carbon dioxide molecules. Our reasoning looks like this. If sunlight necessary for glucose production, and we use foil to cover some but not others, the covered leaves should not produce glucose while the exposed leaves should. Same as predicted, hypothesis supported. Sunlight is necessary for glucose production. And so we've arrived at our final summary diagram of some of the history of discovery of plant nutrition. We begin in the 1600s with Van Helmont testing the old idea that plants are using large quantities of soil to grow, and he finds that soil is not a major building material. Rather, he thinks water is the principal substance that plants are using. Hales comes along and says, oh, but it's not just water. Plants are using water and something else. Remember, he was measuring the amount of water used, comparing it to the weight of the plant. The plants were gaining more weight than the weight of the water used, so something else is being used. What is that something else? He suspected something in the air. And so he does the experiments, putting the plant in the inverted jar in a pan of water, and he discovers that the water level inside the jar rose a little bit, as if the plant were absorbing something from the air. And we now know that something to be carbon dioxide. Julia Sachs comes along and puts wax on the underside of leaves to plug up the stomata, and sure enough, if you deprive a leaf of carbon dioxide, it cannot make glucose. So stomata were those little holes there. Priestley comes along and says, and with Lavoisier argued, that what plants are doing is restoring the air to a condition that will support breathing or flame. Plants are doing this by releasing a gas that we now know is oxygen. So what photosynthesis is then is a complicated chemical process that produces glucose molecules, that's a sugar, from water molecules and carbon dioxide molecules, and oxygen is released as a waste product of that chemistry. Now, Ingenhousz comes along and says, and by the way, this chemistry is happening in the green parts of the plants, and only when light is hitting the green parts. Or rather, we should say that oxygen is being produced only when light is hitting the green parts. As it turns out, we'll later learn there's a lot of chemistry going on in photosynthesis, and some of that chemistry does not require light. But Ingenhousz was pointing out that light was necessary for the liberation of the oxygen, which is one part of the process of photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is this complicated chemistry where plants are using water molecules and carbon dioxide molecules to build glucose and release oxygen as a waste. Of course, like animals, plant cells are going to use some of this oxygen to burn the glucose that they just made, but we'll look into that in a later lesson.